fingering the gold that covered its edge. Then he turned it over, and peering inside, he saw Howlet, clearly marked on the name tape sewn inside. With a swift movement he flung it out into the harbour. William Broadbridge wanted nothing to do with the navy, nothing to do with murder, and nothing whatever to do with a man called Howlet. That damned customs fort! He knew now that he'd turned the wrong way on leaving Mar Thomas's tavern. Not that he'd wanted to leave. William Broadbridge would much rather have stayed in that overheated, smoke-filled place, with a full pot of ale to drink, a wench on his lap, and a winning bet on the fight that would be taking place in the pit at the far end of the room. But it was not to be. His tankard would stay as empty as the pockets of his blue broadcloth coat. Silently he cursed under his breath, damning God, the devil, and his fellow men, and wondering where in the world his next penny would come from. The quayside became busier and brighter as he made his way north, away from the customs fort towards the area near the centre of the bay called the Maddalena, with its teeming bawdy houses and taverns. He wiped his brow to remove the sweat caused by the warm night air, and tried to adjust his eyes so that each image passing before him was singular, instead of the double he was seeing now. And he roundly cursed the citizens of Genoa, as though his poverty and his inability to focus could be laid entirely at their door. That was the theme which dominated his thoughts as he staggered along. This cursed place, bankers to half the known world, bursting at the seams with gold, none of which he could get his hands on. A city-state, a thriving port, and a so-called republic that was really just a swindle perpetrated by the rich upon the poor. The waterside tenements, rising up from the narrow alleyways into the sky till they nearly met at the top, crowded together with the warehouses, left little room for traffic of any sort. Yet beside a building teeming with ragged, hungry, and filthy inhabitants, amid the stink of crowded and deprived humanity, you could find an intricately carved doorway that would lead to a secret and spacious palazzo. Behind the buildings that bounded the port, the new palaces of the rich, built cheek by jowl in glaring display, vied in size with the numerous churches and cathedrals of an earlier age. Men spoke of revolution, of emulating their French cousins and setting up the guillotine before the cathedral in the Piazza San Domenico, so that the aristocrats and bankers who controlled their miserable lives could be brought to justice. Yet the advent of Jacobinism merely added another strain of conflict to a city at perpetual war with itself. Men fought ancient feuds, with Guelphs and Ghibellines still ready to carry their loyalty for Pope or Emperor to open conflict, even if the true cause was lost in the mists of time. Freemasonry flourished, despite the efforts of friars and Jesuits to stamp it out. Business rivalries overlaid all this, with families pitted against each other in a bewildering series of shifting alliances. Few wealthy men ventured out into the streets without an armed escort to protect their person, and they took care to build their houses and palazzos with barred windows on the lower floors that made a surprise attack impossible. Broadbridge, still cursing the city and his luck, bundled people aside. He was in Soporipa now, the arcade that ran under the sea wall, each arch a stall or shop, with the vendors loudly crying out to shift their wares. The smell of exotic spices filled his nostrils, which did nothing to assuage his raging thirst. The hungry, adults and children alike, wandered about or sat listless where they could. Some, with more food inside them, sought to beg from him. Perhaps they would seek to rob him. The Englishmen laughed at the thought of some dip stealing his purse. They were welcome to it, for its only value lay in the leather it was made of. Little of the great wealth of Genoa permeated down to these wretches, who stood to gain something from any revolutionary upheaval. He swore at them in turn, for as a true-born Englishman he'd have no truck with turmoil unless, of course, it smacked of profit. Broadbridge sucked in a great breath of air as he emerged onto the quayside again, though to